All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So I know we got like a couple of seconds left, but we're gonna try to get started on time. So this panel should be very informative, and it is regarding tax incentives. And I'm sure everybody here knows that the state has a series of tax incentives that didn't begin with this administration. Many administrations before have their versions of what tax incentives look like, particularly around economic development and development of housing and other things. I mean, New Jersey probably has dozens and dozens of different tax incentives or tax incentive programs for various things, not just housing. There are tax credits for almost anything you can imagine. Some of them are used, some of them are not used. Some go far back to God knows when, and then there's some that are more recent and relevant. And today we want to talk about some of those, particularly centered around development, tax incentives as it is for development. And today we have with us a pretty robust panel. Tim Sullivan, NJEDA, is here with us today as well. Jeff Mong from Mong Capital, Peter Chin, New Jersey Policy Perspective, here with us. We leaned on them for our early morning panel as well. And Maura Collins-Grew from New Jersey Citizen Action is with us. And Bisola Taiwo, who works for the Newark Housing Authority, is here with us. She does economic development for them. So I'll start off. I'm gonna less commentary as possible on my part. Like to hear from our panelists. I would like everybody to at least introduce themselves. Not long, but in the process, answer a question: how do you view the overall impact of tax incentives on New Jersey's economy? Right. So that in a larger sense, but you can introduce who you are and what it is that you do at the same time. So we can start from here. Bisola.
Good afternoon, everyone.
You want the mic?
You need the mic?
I got you.
So you guys could just pass it among me. I'll go like this. I'll be Magic Johnson up here and do the. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Mayor. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this lovely group today about tax incentives. My name is Bisola Taiwo, and I'm currently the Chief Development Officer of the Newark Housing Authority. Previous to that, I served within the administration of Mayor Baraka, working on economic and housing incentives there as well. And my training is as an attorney. I've done a lot of work in development. Most of my work had to do representing developers, building all types of housing types, and even non-housing types. But whenever we're talking about housing, we need to have affordable housing in it. And of course, the first foray is to see if the property would be eligible for low-income housing tax credits. And so tax credit work is very important. It's been very beneficial, at least I know, with the Housing Authority, can count amongst the housing options that it has, housing that has low-income tax credit in it. So we have up to 350 units that are low-income tax credit housing. And that's been very helpful for the Housing Authority, especially bringing new housing types onto the market. In terms of benefits, I think it's pretty much unspoken. I can imagine that before this incentive was on the market, it was much harder to be able to subsidize affordable housing. And with it, we do a lot more. So in terms of drawbacks, there's some, there's a level of sophistication that is necessary in order to administer a tax credit program and in order to participate in it. And given that we are trying as much as possible, and I know Mayor Baraka is trying as much as possible within the city of Newark to expand the opportunities for development to new and emerging developers, that can be a drawback, a roadblock for some in order to be able to participate and to have LIHTC in their programs, because they're expected to have a certain level of expertise in the area. And if they don't have that, that can really hamper them. And so, opportunities for more collaboration with more experienced developers that can bring them into the space that they need to be in to have, at the table, the level of expertise that would allow them to get that kind of tax credit, that would be great. That would be the only drawback that I would want to highlight. In terms of reforms, I would say that there are what I've seen in other states, speaking for public housing entities, there are specific set-asides for public housing. And so it would be great if that were something that's considered within the state of New Jersey to have set-asides for public housing entities specifically, because as we know, when tax incentive and tax credit supported housing come out of their period of eligibility, developers have the opportunity to sell or to convert those housing types into market rate. And when you're a public housing authority, you really don't have that need to switch the property to market rate. So it allows for a longer period of affordability. So I think it's something that should be considered in the state of New Jersey. With that, I will hand off.
Come on. Pass it down. Yep. We're just gonna go all the way down this way. It's easier. Yep, we're gonna go all the way down this way. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mara Collins-Grew. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at New Jersey Citizen Action. We are a 43-year-old organization based in the city of Newark, do statewide work, both in policy advocacy, but also have a very large direct service arm that does a lot of work around, getting people housed, eviction prevention, first-time home buyer programs, healthcare enrollment, and a number of other programs. So I'm pleased to be here today. I am neither the housing expert nor a tax incentive expert. What I am is a policy advocate who has often been in a place where we encourage legislators and our agencies to think about the investments that they're making and the choices that are being made. And I would say for all of the work that we do, and I think any incentives that the EDA issues, that the lens really needs to be one of how they increase both equity and affordability across New Jersey. We continue to have tremendous disparities in all areas across the state of New Jersey, and that has to be the lens and the question we ask in everything that we do. So I will say this is not, there's been many things that the EDA has done more recently that have, I will say, cleaned up the act a little bit, have really invested in some good things. We have entered the next phase of work around worker justice, and one of those is around the issue of childcare. And there are programs at the EDA to enhance the availability of childcare across the state of New Jersey through investment. So I think there's a lot of good conversation to be had here and a lot of good questions to be asked about what the actual impact is when we make the decisions to subsidize and incentivize, especially large corporations and employers, to move their businesses or to relocate within the state of New Jersey. So that's where I will leave it for now, but happy to be here with all of the people on this panel.
Thanks for having having me here. Jeff Monghe from Monghe Capital. We're a capital solutions company located in downtown Newark. We've been around for about 15 years. What we do is we represent largely emerging developers, but developers in general, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of businesses that are looking to execute on a large-scale capital project. We've done about over $2 billion worth of transactions nationwide. In Newark, for instance, we helped Audible with their headquarters in downtown Newark. We recently closed with New Jersey Performing Arts Center, their large-scale master plan development. We are experts in the tax credit field, so we have this niche expertise in federal tax credits on the new market tax credit side, and probably, arguably, we're one of the top advisors in the country. We've done deals in Puerto Rico, for instance, a Boys and Girls Club with a K-12 school with a health center, to an infrastructure project called Destination Crenshaw out in LA, in California. Generally, as it pertains to tax credits, for community development, and everything that we do is all community development, CRA-driven investments, and largely in Black and brown communities. When you talk about community development, I always say this, right? You have to think about community, because without community, there is no community development. So I think that the nexus of really a powerful tax credit program is, how do you involve the community and really truly have that open access, right? How do you bring in subsidy to be able to create economic development in communities and not leave them behind, right? That fine line between economic development and gentrification, how do you make sure that you're involved in the community? And it really starts with policy, right? It starts with policy, and if you have that mindset of making sure that you're not leaving the community behind, and you're not leaving small businesses that are in those communities and trying to thrive, then I think that's where you truly find success.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Chen. I'm Senior Policy Analyst at New Jersey Policy Perspective, where I cover a wide range of issues, particularly tax and budget-related issues. And I think it's hard to talk about economic tax incentives because they cover such a wide range of different programs. Economic tax incentive is just another way of saying government spending. You can't say government spending is good or government spending is bad. It matters what you spend it on. It matters whether you're spending it in an equitable way. And I think those are the questions we need to think about when we analyze these kinds of economic tax incentives, right? But we do need to be extra careful. And I think the reason why, broadly across the country, these economic tax incentives have largely been harmful, both to states and communities, local communities, is because of the race to the bottom, this feeling of scarcity, that if we don't offer credit, we're not going to get this business, and so we have to offer a bigger credit, and businesses play communities off of each other. And largely what this has led to is a shrinking of the overall tax base. And who's running away with the tax credits? It's for-profit corporations. So the reason we need to be careful is because when we say economic development tax incentive, what we mean is a government subsidy to private for-profit businesses. Now, that could still be a good policy, but we need to be very careful about it because if we think about sort of three key questions to think about, that question becomes harder to answer when the primary beneficiary is a private for-profit business. One is equity. Who is benefiting from an economic tax incentive? Is that person for example, recently there was an ordinance passed in Camden, the city of Camden, that required businesses to disclose the number of employees that actually worked in the city of Camden, as well as what the salary ranges were for those employees. And so some companies who got substantial tax incentives to put jobs in Camden, it turns out that very few of their employees are actually living in Camden, and of the ones who are, they're paid very low wages. And so there's a question about, who is benefiting from this? Are we just moving jobs around and not really helping the community where these benefits are supposed to go? So that's question one. On the equity side, who's benefiting? Second is about effectiveness. Does the tax incentive actually achieve the stated goal that we want it to achieve? So if we're saying this is going to incentivize affordable housing development, is it actually creating more affordable housing compared to what the alternative would be if there were no such credit? I think in a lot of cases, what we've seen at a national level around opportunity zones, around other kinds of incentivized building projects is, a lot of these projects might have been constructed anyways, and that the incentives, further enrich the folks who are, putting the projects together. And the last thing I'll talk about is just return on investment. Broadly speaking, and all of the independent economic analyses of economic tax credits and tax incentives have shown pretty low return on investment of those projects to the groups that are handing out the credits. Now, that doesn't mean that the project isn't necessarily worth it. We don't ask the state to provide the return on investment of building a new school, for example. But because we are subsidizing private profits, we have to really think about whether or not we're getting return on investment and whether we're losing tax base. When we think about all of the taxes that are being lost because these incentives are going out the door, there is a harm, because it means there's less money to spend on the kinds of investments that we know make communities strong. So I'll stop there, but those three of thinking about equity, effectiveness, and return on investment have to be at the forefront of analyzing any tax incentive program.
My name is Tim Sullivan. I'm the CEO of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. I've been doing that job for coming up on 7 years since Governor Murphy took office, plus or minus. Mayor, thank you for bringing us together. It's a really important conversation. When I got the invite, I was like, this is a good one. I got to make sure I'm here for this one. And I had a feeling that Peter would be here too. And it might surprise you to know, I agree with almost everything Peter just said, by the way. Not every single thing.
Yeah, sure.
We can have a professional, robust, disagreement on a couple of the finer points there. But yeah, I mean, let me make a couple comments. First of all, it's great to be here. Lots of great interest in this topic, which again is really important. We spend billions of dollars of your money every year on this stuff, so you should care. Invest is the word I prefer to spend. A couple things. One, tax incentives, tax credits are a tool. They are not a strategy. They are a tactic. And it has to be a tactic that is deployed in service of a strategy. Under Governor Murphy's leadership, I do think, that we have been deploying tax incentives and other economic development investments in service of a strategy that is multi-pronged, that I won't bore you with every detail of it, but around investing in our communities, around investing in small business, around investing in innovation, economic diversification, those kinds of things. A very fair critique of the prior approach before Governor Murphy was governor was that this was kind of a tax incentives as a strategy unto themselves kind of approach, and I don't think that works. I don't think it worked, and if you look at the data, New Jersey's economy that Governor Murphy inherited was not the economy you would wish to inherit in any number of ways. Two, tax credits by themselves are only one tool in service of that strategy. I appreciate the kind words some more about things like childcare and small business. So we've invested $140 million in childcare infrastructure, because that's economic infrastructure, not just because we're do-gooders and bleeding hearts, though many of us are. I am, but it's because it's cold reality facts about getting your workforce to work and getting kids a safe and fair place, safe and good place to be during the day. We've invested more than $1 billion in cash, not tax credits, in our small business economy. We've invested a couple $100 million in the innovation ecosystem. So we've tried to have, and nothing's perfect, and I can assure you we are not perfect in our strategy, but we've tried to have a comprehensive approach with tax credits and tax incentives as part of that toolkit to advance a comprehensive strategy. The third thing I'd say, and a number of commentators, but Peter in particular mentioned this, there's different kinds of tax credits. Not all tax credits are the same thing. I'd break into sort of three big buckets, and there's, as the mayor said, there's probably 15 or 20 little buckets by the time you break it all down. But there's location-based corporate tax credits of, as Maura said and as Peter said, trying to get some company to move here, to stay here, you're in competition with. I'll come back to that in a second. Then there's sort of place-based or community development-based incentives. That's housing, that's our Aspire program. George Santos is here, he runs the Aspire program, our historic preservation tax credit, our brownfields tax credit, a handful of other tax credit programs that are trying to build stuff in our communities and build in the right way. We'll come back to the right way in a minute. And then there's kind of sector-specific things, and this is where things like the film tax credit. Peter's not going to sign up to be a fan of the film tax credit program. I know. We'll have a gentlemanly disagreement about that one. But that are endeavoring to, in particular, incentivize in those cases brick and mortar facilities. So I think about the South Ward in Newark and what's going to happen at Lionsgate and create a lot of permanent jobs. The knock on film tax credits is they create a lot of temporary jobs. If you build a facility that's going to be full all the time, that's going to create a lot of permanent jobs, careers for kids in Newark, kids that grow up and get jobs. So you got to have, so not all tax credits are the same. Under the previous administration, the EDA approved something like 360 different tax credit projects. Some of the ones Peter mentioned are on that list that were corporate tax credits for getting somebody to move around or stay in place. That's a lot of those kinds of projects. Since Governor Murphy signed the Economic Recovery Act into law on January 7th of 2021, we have approved 4 total corporate tax credit, location-based, trying to get somebody to move around, stay type projects. So we have dramatically winnowed that down, because that is a situation where you want to intervene as infrequently as possible, because there are a lot of people out there who are not doing the right things, and not the companies themselves, but they're playing people off each other, and it's a bunch of baloney, and you get caught up in this game. So you got to be really selective. There are many people in the world today that 4 is, by the way, not enough, and they'd like to see us do some more. Not necessarily in this room, not necessarily at this table, but that 4 number is pretty low, particularly compared to the 350, 360 that we inherited. We've done a lot of place-based investments. The Aspire program has clicked over $2 billion worth of awards. That's supporting overwhelmingly residential projects, so nearly 5,000 units of housing, nearly 2,000 of those are affordable. In Newark, for example, more than 2,000 units of housing, a little less than 600 of which are affordable. The mayor's been a champion and leader on inclusionary zoning and lots of other great housing initiatives. So we want to build the right kinds of projects. The other thing that is really important is if you're going to have these tools, you got to use them the right way, and they've got to include the right features. And ours are not perfect, but for example, when we invest any meaningful amount of money of yours, we require, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, no negotiation, no, mother may I not do this, a community benefits agreement that the relevant mayor or city council and the developer have to negotiate away from the EDA, separate from that, so that it's relevant to that local community. We require prevailing wage, not just on the construction side, although that's important, but also on the building services side, the building service work side of the equation as well. We require a net benefit test. And we also, to Maura's point earlier, appreciate the kind words, we're making sure people do what they said they were going to do. Did they create the jobs they were going to do? Do we have accurate and verifiable data to show that? Did they build the building they said they were going to do? Does it comply to the green? Does it have the 15,000 bells and whistles that government programs require? And making sure people are held accountable, because this is not my money. It's your money. It's the taxpayers' money. And people should, if they promise and ask for money, they should give back. There are policy things we're going to ask for around affordable housing. There's a 20% affordable requirement in our Aspire program, for example. We should, as taxpayers, as investors, get to demand those kinds of things. And if they don't want to comply with those things, then don't use the program. That's cool. That's fine. Build your project anyway. And if you can build your project anyway, you probably didn't need the tax credits to begin with. I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, and I talk quickly, but it's an important damn topic to me since I feed my family based on it. Thank you.
Yep. Hold on. While you got the mic, I just want you to, just talk a little bit about some of the tax credits that you think have been successful in your mind. Out of many that exist, some that you think have been successful, and how they contributed, to the economic growth of the state or that local economy.
Yeah, I'd certainly point to the Aspire program. Aspire is, in the grand scheme of things, in its early days, was part of that package that the governor signed in 21, very early 21. Again, lots of housing production that's coming out of the ground right now, including NJPAC. We were just together a couple weeks ago, Mayor, to break ground there. Across Route 21, we've seen Borai's project is coming out of the ground. We've seen 15 or 20 different approvals. Looking at George, 15 or 20 different approvals across the state. We just had one in Camden. We had one in West Deptford for senior housing and affordable housing. So that's been certainly an impactful program. Interest rates have not been kind to that part of the marketplace and housing production generally. Like, incorporate by reference, we need to build a ton more housing in New Jersey and across the country. Hopefully, we'll see that happen, but who knows what the federal government will do here. But Aspire is certainly one, and I'll point to the film tax credit program. I'm intentionally poking Peter on this one because I know it's one of his least favorite. The film tax credit program has had a huge impact, and I think is only barely beginning to scratch the surface of what the impact is going to be. Without the film tax credit program, you would not see Netflix investing $1 billion in Monmouth County. You would not see Lionsgate converting a former public housing development into a first-rate studio in the South Ward. You wouldn't see 1888 studios coming together in Bayonne. Again, these are permanent career jobs, overwhelmingly union jobs, again, located in Bayonne, in Newark, and Monmouth County as well. So you're talking about a huge impact of a brand new industry that's going to have its own sort of flywheel effect over the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And it does not have the same transient nature as some movies in town shooting a film today, tomorrow, next week. These are permanent jobs that will benefit communities.
So Jeff, I'm going to go to you. Jeff, just want to ask you, you heard this conversation about economic benefits and the cost. So just really want to talk to you as you are a practitioner here. Do you think the economic benefits of these incentives outweigh their costs? And given the argument that's not the argument, the kind of...
It sounds like an argument to me.
Yeah. The tension that's happening there. How do you think that plays out in your mind in communities like Newark who, with limited budgets and folks like that?
Well, first of all, I do want to note that while private investors obviously benefit from tax credits, right? What do you do with that subsidy matters, right? So I think that we all agree with that. So and how those programs are set up, and this is all the stuff I'm hearing, which obviously we believe, right? I think where the issue ends up. And I've done this nationwide. I've done this through many cities and towns in New Jersey, and it's the same issue, right? Who's actually making that decision on does this need these credits, right? So, and look, I did 10 years in private equity. We only bought properties in low-income communities, so we had public-private partnerships and financing our deals. And I underwrite, right? So, and I'll tell you this, is that you could set up an IRR to say anything, right? It depends on the variables, right? It could be a 9% IRR, so it's below market. It could be 30%, depending on the variables that you use. So I think that the people that are at the table that are looking at these deals, making sure that the community is getting their fair share, right? Making sure that this deal actually needs the subsidy to be able to underwrite, that robust group of people do not exist in every town, every state, that's across the country. So I think that that's extremely important, and I think that's something that we should really look at closer.
We pass it to Maura. Just want to, just from an advocacy point of view, just really, what do you think are your main concerns about tax incentives, particularly regarding the impact on public resources and local communities?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's that is really where our concern comes in. Peter said, these incentives, basically shrink the tax base. And when we advocate for the programs we advocate for, whether that be, low-income supports, healthcare, child tax credits, whatever that thing is that we're advocating for, it is dependent upon how much money is in the budget. And, here we sit today. We know that the meetings have begun and the word is out that the budget is going to need to be constricted this year, and we're going to be fighting to maintain funding and ward off cuts. And so what we see as advocates in the work we do is we're always fighting for the people who have the least and who need the most. And so while some of these programs might be really good for future benefit, sometimes they displace an immediate need. And the example I will give you, I hail from the southern part of the state on the edge of Burlington-Camden County. So, of course, the most, recent example and the thing that caused a lot of stir amongst advocates and others was the recent offer to bring the 76ers to Camden, right? Which is, I think, how I ended up on this panel, because we had something to say about that. And while there could be some benefit to that, there's a big question about the size and the appropriateness of a tax incentive like that. Like NJPP is fond of saying, it's all about the math, right? So a $400 million tax incentive, what does that equate to? Well, in the county of Camden, the average home price is $200,000 in the county, not in the city, in the county. The average tax is about $7,400. Well, $400 million is like 54,000 homes, right? We are shrinking over the course of several years. This is not all coming out in 1 year, but we are shrinking over the course of many years the tax base in that place. And I would venture to say that the revenue that we see from jobs that are created, many low-wage jobs, servicing an arena, and the added-on fees that we were going to assess to get back some of the loans that were going to be made. At Citizen Action, my colleague Bev Rugia Brown, who works with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, many of those fees that are proposed that would repay those loans, we call junk fees. And they're paid by the very residents and the people who attend an event, right? They're not paid by the corporate actors. So it's those kinds of things that we really question, because our priority does need to be, we need 200,000 units of affordable housing in the state of New Jersey. Like, we're all in when it comes to how we invest in getting that taken care of, right? Do we think that corporate actors, that the guy who owns the 76ers needs all of that as a tax incentive to come to New Jersey? I would say no. So that's the concern. We are always, as advocates, in the programs that we advocate for, looking at a shrinking pool of money. And one of the things that we're battling now is we have a new program, a rebate, property tax rebate program called Stay NJ. I'm sure many of you have heard about it. It's going to cost $2 billion when fully implemented on an annual basis. And that money is giving relief to on property taxes. How much more relief do property taxes need, because we're giving or incentivizing and giving money to these corporate actors in this way? That's what we really need to examine. We need to make sure community is involved in every aspect. And for us, community means not just the elected officials. No disrespect, Mayor Brock.
No disrespect taken.
You know, it needs to be a real community discussion, because people don't connect the action of government to their kitchen table issues. And there's a direct connection. The money is limited, and we need to make sure it's going to the people who need it most.
Bisola. So I want to ask Bisola to jump in, because we use a lot of these tax incentives in Newark, that's for sure. Just about affordable housing and how the tax incentives helps with affordable housing, and then are there any other issues, kind of elaborating on some of the stuff you were trying to talk about before, and in your new role specific to the Housing Authority?
Okay. Well, I think, you know, my co-panelists have fair criticisms of the program, but like you said, in the city of Newark, we've been able to leverage tax incentives to be able to swell our numbers of affordable housing, right? So, you know, I can name multiple projects. New market tax credits was very impactful in the Kruger-Scott Mansion project that brought makerhoods to Newark, created not just, you know, temporary jobs during construction, also supported a lot of permanent jobs and current jobs for artisans, right? So that was great. You know, we've talked about Lionsgate. We know it's going to create some temporary jobs, but they're also going to be permanent jobs in that realm. So it's difficult to say that, you know, the tax incentives have not been impactful. They have been impactful to some extent, right? So creation of affordable housing itself is great. So the criticism that I would add to the table is affordable for whom, right? So because there are multiple tiers of affordability, and as we know, the demographics, I'll use the city of Newark, it really are at 30% and lower of AMI, right? So when you have tax credit units that could go from 80% of AMI, 60% of AMI, you've created affordability, but really the local residents are finding it still difficult to be in those kinds of projects and to afford to live in those projects. So it leaves you know, public housing authorities like ours to fill that gap, right? And as we know, within the city of Newark, that is a heavily used resource within the city. We do have a lot of residents, so we have over 7,000 affordable housing, public housing units within the city of Newark. So the Housing Authority does close that gap a lot. And even in the work that we do and the development that we're looking to do into the future, we anticipate that we will be using low-income tax credits. We're not going to be able to get much done without the incentives that they provide. But at the same time, we're looking at, we're listening to what the community is saying. And to be fair to them, they are correct in that even though some of these units are heavily subsidized, they're still not subsidized enough because, of course, the income level is not meeting inflation rates. There's so many other things people have to pay for that, rent is now becoming so unaffordable. And so there's that impact. We are building more affordable housing, but how can we make it so that we're using these tax incentives to create the kinds of jobs that would allow a Newarker to be able to comfortably afford a 60% AMI units, as opposed to hoping that there are at least 3 or 4 30% AMI that they can't qualify for.
Peter, you're up. So I know you got a whole bunch of things. I saw you taking all those notes over there. Yeah, I've been watching you.
I could talk for like an hour on this.
Yeah, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
I'm not even going to ask you a question. You just talk.
Sure. I mean, you don't want to say that. That's a risk.
But you got to watch this young lady right here.
All right.
The timesheet.
Okay.
Yeah,
so I want to address a few, but I kind of want to zoom out a little bit here and why we're in this position in the first place. This somewhere along the line we decided that taxes and government spending are inherently bad. And so from the feds on down, everyone tried to figure out how can we create different incentives to get done these kinds of projects that are for the public good that don't involve taxing people and corporations and then spending the money from the government. So instead of having robust public housing spending in the United States, we're going to have the low-income housing tax credit. We're going to have this tax credit and that tax credit, and we're going to assist in the financing stack to ensure that developers can build, and they'll have a certain percentage of set aside for affordable. Like, we've created these incredibly complex systems to avoid doing the basic work of government, which depends on taxation, and fair taxation, and then spending the money on the priorities the public wants, right? That should be the process, and instead we've created this entire tax credit system in order to avoid that. And the reason why legislatures love tax credit programs is they don't have to spend the money this year, right? They don't have to put in the budget, we appropriate $250 million every year for the film industry. They can say, we create a tax credit program, which in some future year is going to give, they're going to take that tax credit and we'll just have reduced revenues in the future. But let me tell you, at the end of the day, whether it's reduced revenue or money you spent, it's the same. This is the math works out the same way. And so that's the core problem of sort of how we've reached this point, is we created this very complex system instead of just doing, if we want to fund affordable housing in New Jersey or in the country, we could fund affordable housing. We did do it, right? It did happen. We did build public housing, and there are lots of problems with the way America built public housing. But we have the ability. And so, I do think that it's sort of created this roundabout system that we're in now. And we can't get rid of it. We are stuck kind of with the system we have. But I do think it's important to zoom out here and realize the harms that, on the sort of conditions that have led us here. But, I think it's obviously correct that there's a financing issue with building the full stack necessary to build affordable housing and to make the value proposition work for developers, right? And again, I think the state and the federal government should spend more on building more housing, but it's not happening right now. But I do think that one thing that we should be cognizant of, and this is one issue that I have with sometimes when we look at these incentive programs, is this goes back to Tim's point of it has to be part of a strategy, right? The tax credits are important to build the financing stack, But what about the kind of regulatory environment that makes it hard to build affordable housing in the first place, right? What about the kinds of like systems that we have in place that aren't allowing even like market rate, lowercase a affordable housing to be constructed, right? And I think those are the kinds of questions that have to be part of this conversation instead of, well, let's just pour more money into the tax credits. We have to also think about, when you talk to developers, and I'm sure that, I don't know if Jeff, you would agree, but like so many projects clear all the hurdles, get all of the tax credits, get the financing stack set, and then get stymied by local zoning problems or an objection over, right, like some small item. And like those are issues that, again, could be an issue of state policy to try to address. So I think my other critique on the incentives part is we kind of sometimes look at the EDA is great at what they do. But if you only see the toolbox of the EDA is limited by what the legislation gives them, which is largely tax credit and incentive based. And so, they see a problem and they're trying to find a way to solve it with the hammer that they have. But the legislature, the government, have other tools available, and they should really be leaning on those tools instead of saying, let's just increase the hammer budget, right? And I think that's where some of the issue comes in when it comes to choosing the right kinds of incentives, not just on the tax incentive side, but on the regulatory environment and other kinds of subsidy side.
So while you have the mic, I'm gonna give you a little bit more time.
Okay.
Just around the country, do you see any alternative models to tax incentive structures that exist that we can lean on in New Jersey?
Well, so again, this is more on the housing side and less on other economic development side. But let's take a look at, for example, what California has done with some of the incentives, some of the changes around zoning laws and creating density around transit sites, right? Where they've essentially said the state is going to create housing policy and supersede some of the local rules around parking requirements or whatever else in these particular areas where we need to build housing, right? California's in a housing crisis, and they said this is one way to address this issue. Again, it's not that they don't still have tax credits to incentivize housing. It's that they're figuring out other tools and they're using other tools in order to get there. Or if we look at Minneapolis and their pushback against single-family zoning and requirements on single-family zoning, and saying we're not going to have it anymore. People can build up. Build those 2 and 3 and 4 unit households. That's an important step, and I think we have to think about those kinds of moves. I'd also say a number of states are doing more direct investment in housing. Again, like New Jersey, we have Mount Laurel, we have the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but the Affordable Housing Trust Fund gets rated for lots of things that aren't affordable housing, right? So we should think about, if we really want to build affordable housing, let's build more affordable housing and let's go pay for it. I think that's a reasonable step to take, instead of saying, let's pour more into this sort of tax incentive environment. And again, I'm a realist here. We're not going to snap our fingers and all tax incentives are going to go away. We have the system we have. But it's the outsized reliance on those tax incentives that sometimes limits the universe of what kinds of good government can do.
So I want to, last question, and I'm going to open up the floor to the audience to ask questions. I just want to ask, folks really about if you had an opportunity to make some immediate changes to any of the tax incentive policies, whether you want to do it now or 10 years from now, what would it be that you think would benefit your perspective on this? Yep.
Have all this other stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Time.
First of all, I think.
Okay, I'm talking
All right. I know her.
Yeah.
So first of all, the programs need to learn how to work together, right? And especially when it comes to federal and state. There's so much federal money that's out there that it's hard to, whether it's historic tax credits or new market tax credits again, that sometimes trying to bring it together with state incentives don't really work out well, right? So that's number one. And a good example is the state of Illinois. They have a state new market tax credit program. So they basically drive federal tax credit allocation to the state because they have an opportunity to twin those credits together. Here in New Jersey, thankfully, we have the state historic tax credit program that's going to end up driving, those investors here because they could look at both federal and state. As it pertains to, there are some bastardized tax credit programs out there. I got invited to talk about the Opportunity Zone, and then I stopped getting invites, right? Because I said, it's a trickle-down community development, economic development program, and you can't tell people to do good, right? If they could do well and not do good, just do well. And that's what's happening, right? So we had a lot of Opportunity Zone investors, and I'm an opportunity, my downtown Newark deal is an Opportunity Zone deal. I think I was one of the first in the state of New Jersey to do an Opportunity Zone deal. But most of these folks that came to us, they were going to do that deal anyway. All they were doing they were taking that as an enhancement. So they weren't underwriting an Opportunity Zone benefit in their IRR. That was the gravy. So they needed to underwrite and then go ahead and do it. And then they were doing it on the outskirts of the communities, right? So it was a qualifying census tract, and that's another thing. How did those census tracts get selected? But it's a qualifying census tract, but they're doing it based on where you're going to put your money, right? And if you're going to assume, this is the great thing about credits, if you're going to do a retail strip center in a low-income community that is going to get $30 a square foot in rent, for instance, versus $60 in square foot in rents elsewhere, where investors going to go, right? They're going to go to the place, the main streets, right? They're not going to go to the MLK boulevards of the world, right? And I worked at the Upper Manhattan Pyramid Zone many years ago, so we saw that in Harlem. We were trying to tell people that you have retailers that had some of the best sales per square foot in Harlem, and you couldn't get people to come to Harlem based on the economics. Why? We all know why, right? So to have that carrot when they need it, to be able to make things equal is a good thing. Making sure, and I think you said this earlier, making sure that those opportunities go to the community, the people in those communities that suffered through all this investment, right? You're creating subsidies. Subsidies are being created, being put into communities that are gentrifying. So people with means are going into communities that were built by subsidies for poor people. But think about that, right? And I'll give you your minute back.
So what I'm going to do is, if people have questions, they should come to the mic. We're going to ask all of the questions and let the folks wrestle with these. Do you want to say something? Anybody want to say something about the last one?
Can I just say one last thing? I had my
You've said too
30
much.
seconds.
So one thing, I just want to give a prime example. We partnered up with Enhanced Capital to buy the Aspire credits, right? So we said, okay, we're MBE, we're in Newark, and this is what we do. We invest in low-income communities, and here goes a great program, and we found a great partner that was looking to try to make a connection in New Jersey, but we did deals with them in different states. We said, but you know what? You need a connection to New Jersey. You need a connection to the community to be successful. So that's another example of how a big powerhouse tax credit investor like Enhance would see the value of partnering up with Mohan Capital to go out and buy tax credits under the Aspire program.
So anybody have any questions? You want to line up? If not,
Can I get a?
Yes, jump on that.
Thank you. Well, at some point, I want equal time on the Sixers. I'm going to come back to more. I see it a little differly. I'm a Knicks fan, but go Sixers.
Well, they're bad now. So,
Exactly. This may be the good time to try and get them. A couple things on the sort of things I would wish, magic wand kind of moments. I'll point my magic wand toward the federal government. To Bisola's point, a wholesale look at the calcified, ridiculous 60s vintage affordable housing rules that still govern how a lot of the federal government does things, AMI, where those maps are drawn, all needs of go for a long walk, think big thoughts, start over, not quite start over, but be willing to break some glass there. That's something I would certainly do. The other is, right, if Congress passed a peace deal on corporate tax credits, I'm pretty interested in that. Right? That the states are never going to behave. That is going to have to be a federal top-down solution. I wouldn't count on it certainly in the next 2 to 4 years, but that's probably the least of our worries.
Wait, why?
Yeah, exactly. But if peace broke out there, that would probably be an interesting thing. But it has to be comprehensive. The third thing is, and this is a Jersey comment, Maura mentioned we need 200,000 units of affordable housing. I actually think that's at risk of being low for what we need. We have to build a ton more housing in this state. We are a growing population. We are welcoming people, but people are having, welcoming people from all over the world. We need to build a ton more housing. And it's not just, to Peter's point, not just by throwing more motor oil into a junky engine. We've got to build, zoning, planning, home rule, right? We're at league, right? This is I'm at risk of getting run out of town, but we got sort of a 565 different ways to approach things, and we're getting an outcome that's kind of crappy. We got to be able to ask some of those questions that people don't want to ask.
Yep. Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right. Mike's moving.
Yeah, we love him. So.
Not to sound like an anti-capitalist, it's important for everyone to go home with something. And I think while we're talking about tax incentives, we really need to take a look at those entities that are not as concerned with their bottom line, are not incentivized by the bottom line. They do the work of providing affordable housing, and they do it because they care about it. This is their main focus, that's their mission statement. Take them out of the gauntlet to, the competition with for-profit developers, right? And that can be done through set-asides that are impactful, that are actually meaningful. Let's say, okay, we're taking, tax incentives and we're putting them to the side and we're saying, just these folks get these tax incentives. And they work on that, and as part of that, they start to, those entities are thinking about the wealth gap that we're dealing with, right? So instead of creating renters where, who knows what 30% AMI is gonna mean in the future, even though today we're saying it's the affordable rate, it may go lower than that. So if we are actually interested in creating more affordable housing that's sustainable, I would say we should do more in homeownership, in the homeownership realm. I'm thinking about supporting, the kinds of work, the work that Newark Land Bank is doing. It's the only one in the state that is doing what it does. So for me, it's very important that we put keys in people's hands as opposed to giving them a lease, so they can have a home of their own and build towards the future.
She's trying to get money for the housing authority. Keep getting she's got her assignment and she on it.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it though. Come on, sister. Come on. All right. Well, I think you're gonna close us out then. Yeah. Is there somebody else coming? No, you're gonna do it. Good. Go ahead. Yeah, it's on. It's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, so I'm a resident, a homeowner in Jersey City, and what you said was right. The tax abatement in my 20-block area, it's like 20 high rise, right? My taxes, my home property taxes went from $900 to $4,900 a quarter. I'm a senior citizen. How do all that benefit me? How do it benefit me?
You was paying $900 in taxes?
Yeah,
A quarter.
And it went from $900
A quarter.
to $4,900 a quarter.
Wow. You can't leave. You can't. Oh, okay. I thought you was about to do that. Leave, like drop the mic or something.
She gotta go pay her taxes. So I'm gonna add to that. That type of dynamic. Pilots, right?
You want to say something?
We've had residential development that has gone up, right? We've seen them, right? And they come and they say we have, they ask for pilots, and a lot of these residential developments were done with pilots and not but for. But a lot of the presentations, at least in my town, and you guys could look me up, I'll tell you what my town is. but anyway, I don't want to get myself in trouble here. I live in Union. But you know, and I was on the school board, and this is a real life, you know, example. So we were trying to, we were worried about people, you know, kids in the residential development. Those developers, you know, made a presentation. It's not their fault, right? They made a presentation of how many kids, school kids, would be, you know, expected, right? We're going to have young professionals. You hear this in all these development. No kids. We don't. Then it gets developed, and then you have all these kids come in, and it stresses the school district, and then you just took away all this opportunity for taxes to go to the schools. So I know there was one town, I don't know if it was Cranford or not, but they had a clawback. You know, basically, if you got a kid, you pay for the kid, right? And so there are solutions that are out there that we should be considering. We still need to get those developments up, but there should be some equity to that.
Is somebody want to answer that question directly?
I mean, well, I will say that one issue that we're seeing, right, is, and this goes to some of the sort of broader stuff I was talking about with tax incentives overall, is we create all of these little carve-outs, these pilots, because the city can't say we're going to give whatever $20 million or $100 million over the next X years to this developer. But we can create a pilot, which reduces their tax payment. But what that does is it means that who has to pay for what's missing from that tax payment? It's everybody else, everybody who's been there, right? And so when because again, we have this anti-tax rhetoric for decades, for a century, that's been, you know, pushed hard by, you know, right-wing think tanks and politicians, and they've convinced everybody, tax bad. And so we can only fund stuff by carving out taxes, by getting rid of taxes, by, you know, taking away taxes. And what that ends up doing in a lot of cases is hollowing out the tax base so that what's left is falling disproportionately on, you know, on the residents who are there. And in the case of many of our communities, right, I live in Newark, right, it's falling on Newark, you know, the people who can least afford to pay more, right? And so when we zoom out to this question of like, how are we thinking about these tax incentives, I think that's one thing we have to, it can't just be about this isolated case of like, okay, is this one a good idea? We also have to be thinking in macro about, is this whole system we're building, we're of carve-outs and, you know, these little tax expenditures, is this better than just having a government that works, right? And I would say, you know, the answer is obvious, but I've been wrong for the last, you know, however many years. So clearly, there's still a lot of work we have to do. But, you know, to the question earlier that the mayor raised about like, what could I do before I can wave a magic wand? I think one thing to think about is this. I think we need to rethink how economic development happens. And I do think the EDA has also done a lot of work on small business grants and loans and, you know, little capital, you know, small capital grants. But, you know, I think there has been for a while, like a sort of a focus on mega projects. You know, the Amazon HQ2 and like these giant factories and like huge, you know, transformative projects. But it's not clear that that's how robust long-term economic development is really happening, right? That long-term economic development that's robust and supportive of all people starts from the bottom up, starts from increasing educational attainment, starts from building human capital, starts from making sure that people can afford to stay in their communities and build deeper ties and, you know, build wealth over a long term, right? And I think with these tax credit programs, they're often so complicated, to Jeff's point, that like you need 8 consultants just to figure out how to apply for all of them to make sure that you have them. Sometimes just one. But depending on which one, right? If you're getting a DEP brownfield tax incentive, but you're also getting a federal low-income housing tax credit, and you're also getting navigating that is almost impossible for like a small business. And so it creates, it narrows the vision to just some of these like big projects. Whereas if we need to build a lot of housing, if we need to build strong small businesses, a lot of that's got to come from the bottom up. And we need a better way to try to create, you know, and we kind of know what creates the conditions for strong economic growth. But how are we going to build that? I think that's, you know, again, the tax incentive is a tool, but it shouldn't be the only tool that we're looking for. especially when we're trying to think of a more granular, smaller, focused view of how are we going to help communities develop rather than just, plop down another tower.
Do we have time?
All right, folks.
Do we have time for a direct answer?
Okay, go ahead. Answer.
All right. I want to hear this too.
Well, it's not magic, but, to directly address that, that is a policy problem. That needs a policy solution. I would challenge the EDA and our legislators to come up with a solution for that problem, because what we are doing is having a direct impact on long-term homeowners who are being priced out of their own homes because we're incentivizing this other development. And I'm not saying that it has to be one or the other. We can do both, but we don't have the policy in place to protect the current homeowners. That's a problem, and that's one story. I would imagine you are not the only person that is happening to. Yeah, in Jersey City, my colleague Bev here could go on a long time about that. But it's a problem, and we have to fix that, because we can't be waiving tax liability for new building and at the same time having a disproportionate impact on the people who already live in that town and are struggling to hang on and keep the homes that they're in. So, the EDA, legislators, this is a problem we need to fix. So let's come up with a solution.
Yes, sir.
There are also Jersey City specific reevaluation problems.
Again, you got to speak up. Maybe she was right, the mic didn't work.
In Ontario, we face a very similar problem, which I think you were thinking of addressing here in Newark. Whereas the pulp mills are all closing down because no one buys newspapers anymore. And people are at risk of losing their homes that they had owned for hundreds of years. So what they did is they gave everyone a stipend that would pay their taxes. And I think you were considering doing something like that in Newark, correct?
Well, we did guaranteed income. We did that. Yeah.
It worked great in Ontario until the Conservatives came in and removed it. But people were able to hold on to their homes with the downturn in the economy. I think that benefited the poor people.
Right. Any other questions? Nope. Well, you want to do some final thoughts, you guys? Less than 50 minutes apiece. Some final thoughts, Tim, you want to?
Yeah, I appreciate the chance. Again, there's a lot more. We could do this for hours, and we should probably open a bottle of wine sometime and do that. Look, come back to what I said at the beginning. Tax credits are a tool that can be used well. I think we're doing them, better than the state's done in a long time. But they cannot be the sole tool in the toolkit. It does require a comprehensive approach. It does require a human capital strategy. It requires investments in apprenticeships and education and higher education and all those things. We got to do all of that. I think under Governor Murphy's leadership, you've seen big steps in the right direction on all those fronts, because you've got to do all those things. You can't get there all in one big step. But I think tax credits and economic development, broadly speaking, economic development investments around the country have earned the skepticism that a lot of people have, and we've got to prove. We've got to prove that these are worth it and make sense and are not having collateral ramifications. A lot of that's local property tax questions more so than it is state tax questions, but they're all related. It's one big public revenue stream. So, I'm all for working on figuring that out.
I guess I'd just close by saying, it behooves everyone to ask more questions, especially around equity, effectiveness, and return on investment when it comes to tax incentive programs, both when they're going through the legislature and then when they're tweaking them through the legislature, and when the credits start being handed out. I think there are important questions to ask about, is that community benefits agreement that's been negotiated actually a benefit, or is it just a fig leaf for a project that's already, sailing to completion, right? And so I think that's asking questions. Who is benefiting from this? Is this actually achieving the goals that it's setting out to? Is this a good use of state money? Those are the questions that we have to be asking over and over with each of these projects, rather than just, I think, certainly a lot of folks are willing to turn a blind eye to what those results are going to be.
Not but for, that's That's what they use, the term they use on new market tax credits. So not but for this tax credit, this deal would get done. I think that's where all credits should be. Last money in, right? It should be the same thing, right? You should be able to have someone say to you, you know, this is the last money that we need because we have all these other commitments to be able to make this happen. And my quick commercial is open access. I co-founded a nonprofit called Open Access about 5 years ago to bring black and brown folks into the field of community development finance. Because you'll go to the big conferences and the audience, the participants don't have the reflection of the communities that they serve and they make a living in, right? So if you look at open access, what we're trying to do is we're giving a professional fellowship. You can have a job, you get 160 hours over 3 months. There's training, there's underwriting opportunities, but that's something that we need to also consider is how do we have people from the community serve the community.
That's good. I gotta get you to come talk at my men's meeting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So my final comment actually comes from my colleague who's sitting in the front row and mouthing.
Please mention the public bank. So in New Jersey, there is a move to establish a public bank that would provide capital for things that are not currently have capital available for. And we started with a social impact investment fund, which is in the process of getting up and running with $20 million in state money, which will be used to leverage additional capital to fund things like affordable housing, child care centers, you know, socially beneficial projects that we need. So I think the public bank ties into this overall discussion. The other thing I will say is to add to another word to what Peter had said, and I think Jeff mentioned this earlier. You know, he used a word that I was a little reluctant to go to, which is trickle down, right? We should prioritize the incentives that will have the most direct impact. That should be our litmus test, the most direct, not the things that will trickle down. And we need enforcement and accountability. If the promised community benefits that generated the approval for those tax incentives are not met, those incentives should go away. There should be payback. There should be payback. And I think too often that's not been the case. So enforcement and accountability should be a part of the equation.
And more money for the housing authority.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
No, it's really going to boil down to that. Essentially, you know, we can't have the community development corporations of the world be seen as the secondary players in this space, right? They already do that. They do the work of providing affordable housing out of passion. It is their mandate. It is their core mission statement. So if we're looking to actually get the work done, let's have meaningful and targeted set-asides for them. Let's have programs that ensure that they have the resources that they need, because they're not as influenced by their bottom line. They still need to make enough profit in order to proliferate the creation of affordable housing, but at the same time, it's not about 20% IRR.
Right.
It's really about, okay, at the end of the day, what is in our portfolio, how many people have we served, and how vibrant is our community? So I think they need to be looked at as a primary resource in getting affordable housing back.
Yeah. And so I'm making fun of it, but the reality is true. And there's various amounts of community development organizations, nonprofit organizations that do the work, like Urban League and places like that, that need to get more support and money to do this work. You could close us out, and we out of here.
The governor recently signed the state New Jersey bill.
Right.
I would like input from any one of y'all, and would something like that help this lady?
Would it help it?
State New Jersey, wouldn't that help her?
I have my opinions, but I'm going to let these folks talk. It's not. Yeah, go ahead, Maura. It's not my. It's not my assignment today.
The answer is yes, it could, but there's, in my view, and the view of some of the people we work with, there's a problem with the Stay NJ program. It is not really means tested. It is a program that seniors with a retirement income now, not, these are people who are retired, have an income of up to $500,000 a year. In our opinion, the needs are too great in the state of New Jersey, and the average income and the communities that we need to help are not that well off. And that should be a much more targeted program so that we're not subsidizing people at that high income level. I think it's unnecessary, and it is causing a huge problem and a structural deficit that will only be exacerbated in years to come when that's fully implemented.
Anybody else want to say anything on that? Well, we're going to end right there. I thank you for coming out. I want to thank the panelists as well. God bless you all. Thank you. Yeah, awesome. You guys did awesome.
Always a pleasure.
Awesome.